Good morning, and welcome to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm glad you've made the connection and are with us today. I'm Lori Fitz, your host. And the goal of our show is to explore a wide range of topics that challenge us to see ourselves, our community, and the world around us in ways that get us thinking, get us connected, and perhaps inspired or challenged to do just a bit more because we've made the connection. Our topic today is a passion for a just peace, exploring how to build a bridge between people and between people and the land. And hosting with me is Rick Bernardo, and he has brought guests Joan Deming and Jess Allmeyer. And we'll be talking about their May 24 visit to Palestine and Joan's recent visit to Palestine. Rick, tell us about your friends.
Well, they are the kind of people I love to hang out with or even just to know because they are technically polymaths and they go wide and deep in their experience of life. And that's what I think the best kind of human being does if they get the chance. So, and I know Jess from years ago scoring, they were like something like SAT tests for children around the country, and we were just packed into this whole room. So yeah, I know a lot of wonderful people from that, but Jess I've known ever since that, which goes back 6-7 years or so. And then Jess has a wonderfully broad background. Say two or three things about yourself that you would say, in the elevator.
Sure. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for having us.
Good morning, Jess.
I'm Jess. Currently, I am a hospital social worker, so I am very engaged with people daily. I have done a lot of construction. I've done relief work after earthquakes and hurricanes. I've spent a lot of time in community and doing humanitarian work. Anything like that, I'm very game for.
And Jess creates things, environments. She builds things, she visions things, and she's a social worker, so she creates healing situations for people.
Yeah, I think that intersection between our domain and our mental health, what that looks like, how we can adjust it and help with healing.
There you go. That's a good example. Yeah. And Joan Deming, I've known since our mutual trip to the Arizona-Mexico border a couple of years ago. Was that around May too, I think? No, or
February.
February, okay. Yeah. And we spent about a week there, and that's where I loaned. I loaned Joan out. No, I didn't. I learned that Joan has a background in theology as well. We both went to Pacific School of Religion. I didn't even know that at the same time.
That's crazy.
And so we spent times in Berkeley. But she's got a ministry background, and she does a lot of healing work in places around the world. But tell me a little more about yourself, what you would say about yourself.
Yes, I did go to Pacific School of Religion. I spent 28 years in local church ministry as a United Methodist pastor. And then in 2002, I left that to do nonprofit fundraising and friend-raising, first with social service organizations, and then I connected with an organization in the United States supporting schools for Palestinian students inside Israel. And it just intrigued me and wouldn't let me go. And I spent my last 10 years of my career working to support Palestinian schools and programs making life maybe more livable for Palestinian people on both sides of the Green Line and helping Americans know a little bit more about them.
And that's what brings us here. Thank you. Wonderful.
And in our first segment, I'd like to explore the Tent of Nations and the Friends of the Tent of Nations, FOTANA, that you both are very active in. And I pulled from the website. There were some really wonderful things in the website. I'm going to share the website now, and then I also am going to read a few things. The websites that you can go to are tentofnations.com and FOTANA, which is FOTONNA.org. So in reading about FOTANA, a Jew, a Quaker, and a Presbyterian walked into a cave in the West Bank and met a Lutheran. They were joined by Episcopalian, a Muslim, a Methodist, another Presbyterian, and one still questioning her faith. And what do these individuals have in common? The binding tie is their deep passion for a just peace in an area of the world that finds it very difficult to remedy decades of falsely generated fear and hatred that have resulted in walls rather than bridges being built. So tell me a little bit, Joan, about the Tent of Nations and your relationship with them.
Okay, well, the Lutheran in that story is a Palestinian Christian who lives in Bethlehem. He is a third-generation family member of the Nassar family who bought the farm in 1916 during the Ottoman period. The farm is 100 acres on top of a hill southwest of Bethlehem, and it now is completely surrounded by 5 Israeli illegal settlements, and Israel has been trying since 1991 to claim the farmland as Israeli state land so that more settlements can be built on top of that hilltop. The family has been working through the legal system to prove their ownership of the land and their longtime residency and work on the land and working of the land. And so far, they're still there. So Friends of Tent of Nations was created to support them in their struggle to hold on to their land. They envision it being a family farm. I think people in Minnesota and our part of the country particularly understand the meaning of a farm that is in a family for more than 100 years. And
the land is very important.
Yes,
we become part of it.
Yeah, and I mean, in some ways they would say we belong to the land rather than the land belongs to us.
I found a little bit about the history. It says more than 100 years ago, many family members have worked on the Tents of Nation. During the day and slept in caves at night, they had olives, grapes, almonds, fruit trees, wheat, and other crops grown on the land. It was purchased, as you mentioned, 100 years ago, a time when Palestinian Christians were beginning to emigrate. And at that time, the country was still under the Ottoman rule. But during the British mandate in Palestine from 1918 to 1948, where a lot of people don't know about that part of the history, of that period of time in 1948, they did make up some pretty arbitrary decisions about how the land should be split up.
Right.
Which impacted that family especially. Tell me a little bit about that, because I don't think enough of our listeners maybe understand the full history.
Sure. There are kind of 2 aspects of the family's presence on the farm that are a bit unusual, even for that part of the world. Very often in that part of the world, people live in town and they go out to their land, but this family has lived on the land the entire time. So that's unusual. The caves are natural caves that exist on the farm, and they've made them livable. They've put doors on them and skylights in some cases or windows, but they actually are wonderful places to stay because they stay a bit warmer than other buildings in the winter and cooler during the summer. The other thing that's unusual about the family's ownership of the land is that they have the documentation from the sale, from the purchase of the land all the way back to 1916. And most people didn't maintain the physical records of purchases. They've had it reassessed for their ownership, and Israel actually agrees that the land that they claim is theirs it matches what's on the maps that Israel has, but Israel still wants it.
Whoa.
And with that, what I know that you've talked and you've shared with me about the legal case that continues.
Right. So the requirement is that private land needs to be registered with the government of Israel, even though it exists in the West Bank. This land is in Area C under the Oslo Accord divisions of land, and Area C is 60% of the West Bank, and in Area C, Israel has full military and civil control of all things related to property and people. So they have been required to register, and in fact it's re-registering their land because it was registered under the British before 1948 and under Jordan from 48 to 67. So they've been trying to re-register the land, and they are in a legal process that has had some like 14 or 15 hearings to date and is still going on. The next hearing is December 18th. And an ideal outcome of the process would be that Israel would finally acknowledge that the family does legally own this land and has the right to be on it. And that would prevent settlers from trying to take it. It also would allow for water and electricity to be hooked up to the farm, because presently they have to get those on their own too through rainwater and solar panels.
I wanted to bring up, you said 1967. Again, some of our audience may not know the critical 1967, where the West Bank was occupied by Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War.
Correct.
And then in the 1970s, Israel started building settlements in the West Bank.
Correct.
And that impacted who owned what. And
It did, and it does. And presently, the settlements surrounding the farm are really quite large cities. And I mean, one of them is 60,000. One of them is 65,000 and growing. And they're into a second generation of people living in those settlements. So, in some ways, the challenge here is not to figure out who gets the land and the other one has to leave. The challenge is to figure out how to live together.
I was moved by the goals. Goals being to support the Nasser family's use of legal and nonviolent resistance tactics in order to develop and maintain the family's ancestral lands and to continue the work. Raise funds, raise awareness, be a role model for solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through the use of nonviolent methods, assist in shaping U.S. policy, which we'll get to, and definitely by the third segment we want to be talking about advocacy and sharing information with members of Congress, building bridges of understanding. One of the things that you and I talked about is it needs to be a bottom-up at this point. Tell me a little bit about that.
It really it does need to be bottom up, because it's local people continuing to work land that they consider to be an inheritance of their family. They've actually been offered a blank check for the land, and they've refused any
because
amount.
The land belonged because they belong to the land.
To the land.
They belong to the
yes,
land. Yes,
exactly.
How do you sell something that you belong to?
Yeah, and I think the other way that it's a grassroots program is that it really is also a model of sustainable agriculture and farming and sustainable living lightly on the land. They're very much committed to being a model
of sustainability,
of using resources well, and in a part of the world where water is becoming increasingly precious, being able to reuse carefully. So they're a model for everyone.
And I love this one too, this goal, and then we'll need to go to break, to help build bridges of peace and work to bring dignity and sustainability to all the Palestinian people when the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land is ended. And with that, I'll close this segment. And in our next segment, we're going to hear from Jess sharing about her experience and what it has meant to her. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm Lori Fitz, your host, and today our topic is a passion for a just peace, exploring how to build a bridge between people and between people and the land. And joining with me is Rick Bernardo, and he's brought guests to talk about a visit to Palestine.
Yes, and the guests are Joan Deming, from whom we heard in the first segment, and Jess Allmeyer. I know them both from various paths of what I will call sacred service. Ministry can take all kinds of forms. It doesn't even, in my view, even have to talk about God anymore. But if it's sacred and you're serving, that's all that counts for me. So this is the kind of work they're both up to. And it's in an environment, by the way, Joan was talking about a lot of military aspects in the Palestine geography. And I learned many years ago from Daniel Ellsberg in person the definition of terrorism. He was actually a military intelligence expert, and he became famous for the Pentagon Papers, which told about how the U.S. government was lying to the U.S. people for years about Vietnam. The definition of terrorism worldwide is if you're attacking or even threatening non-combatants with anything serious, like death, or maiming, or their children, for any kind of political purpose. That's the definition of terrorism. And we're in a world, I would venture to say, if you look at the facts, that many nations are terrorist states at this point, in the sense that they supplement and secure that. The work that Jess and Joan Deming and Jess Allmeyer are doing is sacred in that kind of environment. So I just wanted to point that out. That we have such an over-militarized world, and it beckons the terms of corporate sin. Like we're all somehow part of this, and we probably don't want to be. So that was just a little bit of context, Lori, I wanted to give for.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we're exploring two important nonprofits.
Yeah.
That work to make a difference. Tent of Nations and Photana, which is Friends of Tent of Nations. And Photana provides grassroots support through the Tent of Nations, a peace project located in is this Dahir? Would that be the Dahir Vineyard? Dahr Vineyard. It's a 100-acre farm located about 6 miles from Bethlehem on the West Bank, and it's led by an all-volunteer steering committee. Photana helps tell the story and organize support for the Tent of Nations farm, and they're inviting us to join us in this journey of support and how to build bridges and bring down walls. With that, Jess was at the farm.
I was.
And I just would love to hear, as a volunteer, going into in May. This was a challenged area. Mm-hmm. We've been dealing with October 7th results of terrible things that happened, but then we've also seen terrible repercussions of how to deal with conflict and challenge. And one of the things when I was first talking to you about the show is that I'd be a little afraid to be going to the Middle East right now.
Right.
I'm not sure that would be something that I'd feel comfortable with. And your response was that you felt safe there, and it was a piece of paradise. Mm-hmm. And I was fascinated with that. So tell me about the day at the farm for you.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot leading up to that, too, though.
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. I think so. We were meant to be going on a holy trip on visits to the Israel-Palestine area in October. And, of course, that's striking timing for October 7th and what happened there. I think once the war started, we needed to defer that visit, and many people decided that it wasn't their time to go. In May, and throughout the months before that, Joan and I discussed multiple times if there were options, what that could look like. And fortunately, she has many connections in that area, taking many groups over the years. So Joan said, I'm going in May. This is what's going to happen. And of course, us talking, I said, can I go? Not any other. You think you need
Oh,
somebody
please.
else to go?
Can I go to
Should
the
other
Middle
people
East where
go?
there's a war going on?
Yes, yes. And I don't even think there was hesitation. Like, of course you can go.
Yeah.
And that spread out to another friend of mine. Oh, I'm interested in that. Can I go? And we connected with a fourth person who, through other friends, ended up also joining us. So 4 of us ended up on this trip during this time of some unrest, to say the least. We definitely had a lot of discussions about what is safe, what isn't. I think especially leading up to that. After broad discussions, we made our peace with that. We knew people on the ground. Joan knew people on the ground, and we trusted them.
And with that moment where you just, without hesitation, said, yes, I want to go. Can I be a part of this? I'm fascinated with what was that moment like for you, and why was there like no hesitation at that moment? What was it that drew you?
Yep. Probably a compilation of 2 reasons, I think. One, that area, the history, how can you not visit the Holy Land? I have a very strong connection to Christianity through my grandma, and she would love me to visit that area and see what that meant for her and my connection to her through Christianity and the Holy Land. The farm specifically, I have a little bit of background with our family and farming, and in general, if somebody is saying, we need assistance, who can come? Can you come? My first thought is, if it were me and I needed somebody to be there, I would want somebody to come. And it is just an automatic driver action for me to say, well, this is where I need to be.
And when you arrived and you had set up safe boundaries for yourself and talking through what made sense and what didn't, and what could you do and what might be beyond those boundaries. Tell me about that day, the day at the farm.
Well, let's see. First, getting to the farm is a little complicated. You have to take a very specific road that is only for Palestinians. You get in the Land Rover and you go up and down on windy, bumpy roads that are not the very smooth settler roads. It's a very big divide. And then you arrive at this pristine, gorgeous hilltop where you can see for miles. If it were clear, you could see the Mediterranean. There's any number of plants that are growing, of course, that I am not seeing daily in Minnesota. I'm especially drawn to the fig trees, their leaves, and the way they grow. And I think that once you meet the family, it's just a sense of heart and the connection, as we've been talking about, to that land and what that means for their family connection and their spiritual connection. You can't not feel peaceful during part of that visit.
And paradise. Tell me about that.
Well, right. I think that's all a part of it. I think the sensibility that we're firmly rooted and connected to some history and some growth right in the middle of that past and future, it just pulls you into a calm that you don't always experience.
And supper at dusk.
Oh, sure. So there's multiple volunteer groups that were joining us. Our group of 4, another group from Union Seminary, which had a very specific and impressive history coming in after Columbia encampments. We prepared meals together in the evening, and then in the morning we would take shifts. And like a nice family community, we gather together and always have conversation in the evening. There would usually be a gorgeous sunset that was about to be happening, and again, it's just overlooking the Mediterranean to the west. So it's just a very pristine place and time.
In looking at some of your strategies, in working with Fotana and going there, it's fact-finding to a certain degree, being on the ground with the site visits. But you also do outreach with materials and packets to help people understand. Are those available or something that you can get online?
That would be online is where that's available. And specifically, I think what I was referring to when I mentioned information that's been gathered is information that people can use for contacting members of Congress. And the reason for contacting members of Congress is to ask them to press the State Department to weigh in on the case of this farm's attempt to get its land re-registered, and to indicate that the United States sees this as perhaps a model of a place where wholeness and bridge building can happen, where people are able to live side by side without being enemies. In fact, the motto of the farm is "We refuse to be enemies." And
how can that be a symbol for something?
Yeah.
Bigger?
So on our website, on the Fotana.org website, we have a section called Updates, and under the Updates are some scripts that can be used for email or phone contact to members of Congress to ask them to add their members of Congress voice to support the farm in their effort to be recognized.
And Rick, you had a follow-up question as well.
Yeah, I was wondering, because when both Joan and Jess speak about, especially when you speak about being there, I feel it in my gut, and it moves right into my heart. And I just want to check on, where do you, what does it feel like to get this sense of sacredness or paradise or holiness? Is it like coming up from the ground, or what can you give us any other example? Because a lot of people don't ever get that experience.
Sure. Oh, wow. Good question. That's not an easy one. I think it is a sense of rootedness. I mean, I think any doubt or fear that you have, it is more pushed to the back and washed away. And you're talking about the ground. I think there is a firmness of being. So it is more of a full body experience, but just that you're very much more connected.
You're very present is what I'm hearing. You just kind of, I'm wondering if I'm hearing that's kind of almost in the air, which is like a great, it's a term for spirit in most languages and cultures. But all right,
and it's also under our feet. You know, one of the tasks for volunteers like us is to walk the perimeter of the farm every morning and evening to be sure that incursions aren't underway. I mean, from settlers or even from some aggressive neighbors who would love to have access to the farm and love to have that as their space. And so this sense of belonging to that land that we're literally walking over in the morning and evening, and then you report to the family and you feel the connection with the family and they're caring about it.
Thank you, both of you, because there's so many things in life where you have to be there, but some way that people and all of us can look for that and listen for that. Thanks.
And I'd like to share the websites for folks to be able to go to, as we were just talking about that, as well as things to be thinking about. So first, tentofnations.com, great place to go to learn about this farm and this example of how we can live in peace.
And there's actually a tab on the Tent of Nations website that is about volunteering.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. And then there's Fotana, and that is spelled out FOTONNA.org. And that's the Friends of the Tent of Nations and the work that they're doing. And in our next segment, we're going to come back. We'll focus on some of your journey, Joan. I appreciated in our last segment how you helped give us the sense of history. And Jess Meyer, thank you for your insights in the lived reality of being on the farm. And I have some follow-up for you because you just came back, right, Joan?
Did.
And I have some we talked a little bit about the caves in the first segment, and that's something that you had some personal experience in.
Did.
And we'll talk about the recent past and your visit. We'll be right back just after a few short commercials. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. And our topic today is Passion for a Just Peace, exploring how to build a bridge between people and between people and the land. I'm Lori Fitz, your host. And Rick Bernardo is co-hosting today, and he has guests Joan Deming and Jess Allmeyer. Tell me a little bit about.
Well, I just know them from their long histories of sacred work. I've known Joan for less time than Jess, but I also went to the Mexico-Arizona border with them for about a week or so. And but this is a very different experience as they visited Palestine last May is what it is. Yeah. I wasn't there, but I was praying for them the whole time. And we've been listening to their experiences there and a little bit of the context. And we want to talk a little more about how we could make a difference in some of this.
And Joan, we've been talking about Tent of Nations.
Yes.
And Friends of the Tent of Nations. The goal of the Tent of Nations is we want to develop a positive approach to conflict management. In the face of great injustice, we know that we should not hate, despair, or flee. We refuse to be enemies, and we try and transform our pain and frustration into positive actions that will help us create a better future. I was struck by something that you shared with me when you came to the studio this morning about how you were just there.
Yes.
And you were there when the Iranian ballistic missiles were coming.
I was.
And you were in that cave we were talking about in the first segment.
Yeah.
And that's a fearful moment. The whole of northern Israel, Palestine, Lebanon are dangerous places right now.
Right. In fact, I had been planning to visit friends in the north in the Galilee region, and I canceled that almost as soon as I got into the country because it was clear that the security situation didn't make that a friendly thing to do. But I was in the country on the night that Iran sent the ballistic missiles to Israel, and it was an unmissable signal that we needed to run to the cave or go to the caves. The sirens went off in the neighboring communities, and I had an app on my phone that also was blaring at me to get to a safe room within a minute. And we had been primed for which cave to go to. We had the key to it. There were, at that time, 4 volunteers on the farm. The family had already gone home for the day. So there were just the 4 of us, two people from Holland, 1 from France, and me. And we went into the cave, and from there, through a west-facing window, we could watch in the night sky the streaks of the ballistic missiles heading to the west and hear the booms of explosions, and occasionally the ground shook underneath us. I don't think we could have felt safer than we did. We were in an extremely safe place. And I had friends in Bethlehem who were terrified that night because they didn't have safe rooms to go to. And they could see the returning anti-missile fire coming from Israel, and those were exploding somewhere overhead and dropping fragments into their communities. So I actually was in quite a safe place, but it was a sobering time. And the next morning I woke up to find out that my flight home from Tel Aviv had been canceled, and there weren't any other flights available. So that was interesting.
You're going to be there a little bit longer.
Yeah, as it turned out, only 2 days longer, and I was able to fly home through Amman. So I was very lucky.
And Jess, you were sharing in the last segment about your time. You also experienced, seeing the bombs overhead and hearing, and tell me a little bit about your experience with that.
I think regularly during our days working, watering, weeding, we would hear fighter pilots going back and forth east to west. They were too high for us to see, but then, of course, we could hear the bombs go off. We could hear such dissonance. I mean, so you're at this place in the farm where you're very peaceful and trying to rectify that with miles away, 20, 30, 40, 50 miles away in Gaza, this destruction happening. That rumble from the bombs especially, it was a wake-up call for this very strange time in that area.
It's a very dangerous time, but it's also a time that you need volunteers.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons that Fotana has been working hard to try to recruit volunteers or to get the word out that volunteers are welcome and needed is because volunteers seem to be the reason that the farm is still in the family's hands. Our international guests at the farm are the reason. We don't talk about volunteering, we talk about visiting, but it's really important to have a stable international presence on the farm. Settlers seem to not want to cause problems that would be on an international scale. Yeah. And during the time that Jess was there were settlers who would drive up and down the perimeter just outside the perimeter of the farm with a red flashing light on their vehicle just to make sure that we knew that they knew that we were there. I didn't see that during this time. They're staying a little bit farther away, and the farm family firmly believe that it's because of the international presence.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I just was going to also, there was some of what I'm hearing is this amazing heart-centered work in the midst of massive violence, all around you. Even though it wasn't close, but it's like, I don't think anybody in this country, hardly anybody except war veterans, know anything of what that's like.
But there's also a purpose in being able to humanize the Palestinian story. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
This at the farm, the Nassar family end up being kind of the symbol of the Palestinian people, but we met others during our trip too, and the irony of the stereotype of the Palestinians being terrorists, being violent, wanting to drive Israelis into the sea, is that none of that is true. And in fact, the Palestinian culture values hospitality as maybe the very highest of its moral values and goals. And so when you're there, you're welcomed as family almost immediately. You're given you can't be there without being offered tea or coffee immediately, and then sitting down and sharing stories, and it's just such a value to meet these people as people, and as they give us opportunities to be a part of the farm life, it's things like feeding the animals and, cutting weeds or digging up the land around baby trees so that they can be fertilized before the fall rains come, or things like that.
And your hope is when a volunteer makes a commitment that they are going to give not a day or two, that they need to at least be given 2 weeks to be there, and ideally more, a month or even 3 months.
What I'm hearing here, too, is people have got to remember that the violence in the areas in most places in the world, there's money behind it, there's power behind it. That's not most of the reality literally on the ground. Because, when we talk to people like you, you're not lying. You've been there. You were there. You have accurate memories of what's really going on the ground. And people need to remember the difference between that and the echelons of other power dynamics.
Right. I mean, those are just families like you or I trying to live their daily lives and what that means. I think coming back to the resilience of the people we met, It's humbling being there, witnessing through our lens what that means, seeing a level of trauma that's consistent, yet the humanity, the hospitality is so comforting. And my flight was delayed, and there's just this compassion that comes immediately from the family to me. And I'm like, how do you have the bandwidth to do this? It's very humbling.
There's a value that they have a word in Arabic, sumud, which means steadfastness. And I think that's also a really good description of what keeps the people going, steadfast commitment.
You also have a saying with Fotana, come and see and go and tell.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, I think that there's a real belief that our stories that we hear in our media are just such an incomplete picture. And it's so important for people from our part of the world to go and actually meet people and experience it, not just go see the holy stones, but meet the living stones and hear the stories from their lips, and even experience just how wearing it is to live with the situation they live with day after day, and always needing to be aware of what can go wrong so they're ready to deal with it if it happens. And so being able to tell their stories coming back is a real gift. And I think what we can do, what Jess and I can do, is kind of humanize people who have a bad stereotype attached to them.
And in our last few minutes, tell us again about advocacy and what we can do in Congress to help support the work that's being done.
Well, the United States State Department really has made an effort to be aware of the situation of the farm and to advocate with Israel to some extent, and for finalizing the registration of the land. And there are scripts for emails and phone calls that are under an updates tab on the Fotana.org website that will allow you to have some guidance in making those contacts. We're pretty sure that the pressure from members of Congress has really made a difference in Israel's willingness to let the farm keep going rather than just step in and take it away. And we're hoping that will continue.
And to find out that information, it's FOTONNA.org. And you also mentioned that you can sign up for getting emails.
Yes, there's an email newsletter that's published probably only 3 or 4 times a year, but also updates are sent out before and after every hearing. So if anything happens on the farm that we would want supporters to know about, we send an email update. And there's a tab on the Fotana.org website called Contacts, and under that tab, there's a place to sign up for the newsletter.
And I have only a minute left, but if there's someone out there that's like Jess that says, yeah, I want to go, that's touched their heart.
Recommend.
Jess is recommending. Is that the same place to go to say, yes, I want to volunteer? Yes.
Actually, the tentofnations.com website is the place to go for that. And there's a tab on that called Volunteers. And it gives information about how to do it. And it also gives up contact.
Tentofnations.com, just the way it sounds, and Friends of Tent of Nations North America, that spells out, as Lori's been saying, FOTONNA.org.
And I want to just thank you both for being here, sharing your story, helping us hear the story from those that have lived on a farm with good people that want peace, and sharing with us how we can have a passion for just peace and how we can build a bridge between people and between people in the land. Thank you. We appreciate you being here.